So far on this general knowledge series, the Muslims and the Christians haven't met. This changes with my first proper video on the Middle Ages, and more specifically, the roles of the Eastern and Western churches in the first four Crusades, launched by the papacy. By the 11th century, Muslims had held Palestine for 400 years. Over the course of the 9th century, the Turks converted to Sunni Islam, and in the 11th, they attacked the Shiite Fatimid Caliphate, through which they gained Jerusalem. The Turks also conquered large swathes of Byzantine territory in Asia Minor in modern-day Turkey, and the emperor's call for assistance was a catalyst for launching the First Crusade. Although the churches, which came to be known as Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox, had officially split by this time, they were still willing to help each other to defend Christendom against infidels. However, relations were tense, and by the Fourth Crusade they would fight each other in Constantinople, leading to the creation of the short-lived Latin Empire. During the High Middle Ages, the Church was in a struggle with secular authority, fighting to assert its privileges and autonomy as an institution apart from princes and kings. Since Emperor Constantine, it had lain under the dominion of feudal monarchs. Church revenue was seized, and the nobility put their friends in charge of episcopal seats so they could claim church income. Simony, the practice of buying positions within the church hierarchy, was rife, meaning that people entirely unsuited to tending the flock of the faithful ended up presiding over congregations. This went all the way to the top, and after a string of violent, lustful, and even murderous popes, the time for reform had come. High up on the agenda was the assertion of the monastery's privileges, of which Cluny, located in Aquitaine in modern-day France, was a standout example. Bishops, however, came out on top during the reformer Pope Leo IX's tenure. Leo did a tour of Europe, on which he listened to people's grievances and personally bestowed authority on bishops. He also instituted the Council of Cardinals for the election of future popes. The Orthodox Church today, which corresponds to the eastern portion of the schism, may be familiar to you in its Russian or Greek iterations. Today there are 250 million Orthodox believers, compared with an estimated 1.5 billion Catholics and 800 million Protestants. I hope to explain why the first two split in this part of the video. From the beginnings of the Church as an institution up until the end of the early Middle Ages, Constantinople and Rome represented a united front. The citizens of Constantinople considered themselves to be Romans, and the papacy had to be approved by the Byzantine emperor, which he symbolically did without much deliberation. This ended with the coronation of Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor in 800, which undermined the authority of Byzantium. When the churches were united, they were organized by the principle of 5 preeminent bishoprics in Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, Jerusalem, and Rome. The Pope, therefore, in theory, had as much authority as each of his 4 counterparts. However, gradually, and then all at once, seemingly irreconcilable doctrinal division began to emerge, encouraged by the widening language gulf between Latin in the West and Greek in the East. Controversy erupted concerning the Nicene Creed, and in particular the Filioque in the Latin version, which means "and the Son." In the original Greek, the creed runs, "The Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father," but the Latin adds this Filioque because of the Western emphasis on the essential equality of each of the Trinity's elements. This modification by the Pope went into effect without a council, which angered the East, and in 1054 the last straw came when an Eastern scholar condemned the Western practice of performing the Eucharist with unleavened bread, because that was seen as a Jewish custom. The Pope's emissary, Cardinal Humbert of Silva Candida, excommunicated the Byzantine emperor, to which he retaliated in kind, and the churches have been separate ever since. The First Crusade began as a Byzantine rescue mission, and initially had nothing to do with the Holy Land at all. When Alexius I, the then Byzantine emperor, called on Pope Urban II for assistance, It was meant to rally a few thousand troops to the cause of reclaiming former Christian territory in Asia Minor. It subsequently turned into a mass movement, when somewhere in the region of 100,000 people signed up, swept up by the idea of going on pilgrimage, doing penance, and waging holy war. The spontaneous vanguard of the People's Crusade was led by the charismatic Peter the Hermit, and it massacred Jews along the route as they travelled east to Anatolia. Driven by a certainty that the end times were upon them, they were defeated comprehensively by the Turks. A professional army followed them, and were much more successful in their endeavour. They swore an oath to the Byzantine Emperor that they would return any lands that they conquered to him, and this was a promise that they kept when they took back Nicaea, Antioch, and finally captured Jerusalem after 4 centuries of Muslim control. The Second Crusade was a much less heroic affair and was called following the loss of Edessa, without Byzantium asking for intervention. It ended in the illogical siege of Damascus, which was an ally in the region, and the Christians were defeated decisively. Great characters make up the cast of the Third Crusade, with Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor, and Richard Lionheart of England on one side, and Saladin the Sultan on the other, who was written about favourably in contemporary chronicles as a worthy and honourable opponent. Saladin took Jerusalem, and the crusade ended in stalemate. A truce was struck that pilgrims of all faiths should be protected in the Holy Land, which was honoured, at least in Saladin's lifetime. Instead of going over land, the army of the Fourth Crusade went by sea, negotiating transport with the Venetians, who put commercial activity on hold to build them a fleet, which they failed to pay for in full. This led the Crusaders to divert their activity from the original objective of Jerusalem's recapture and reroute to attack Constantinople, deposing the emperor and installing their own. In so doing, they created the Latin Empire, which lasted several generations before its collapse and the Byzantine restoration in 1261.